With a stable and steady government on the line, I want to bring in MS Now Washington correspondent and co-host of The Weekend, Jackie Alamany. She is on the byline of the brand new reporting about Natalie Harp. Ned Price is a former senior State Department and CIA official, and Mitch Landrieu was a senior advisor in the Biden White House, national co-chair for the Harris-Walz campaign, and is currently co-chair of the Democratic organization American Bridge 21st Century. It is good to see you all. Jackie, this is your reporting. Talk us through it.
Yeah, along with my colleague Jake Traylor, who's been all over this story. But essentially, we found out that Harp, who is in extremely close proximity to the president, you don't even need to take us on our word for that. Just look at the majority of pictures that are taken of President Trump, and you usually see Natalie Harp, his 35-year-old aide, close behind him. She is someone who is with him at all hours, and she declined for a good portion of the first year of the administration to fill out the forms required and submit them to get a security clearance. It's unclear exactly how much this would impact her day to day in terms of, whether or not this person she's actually going into places like the Situation Room, receiving material that has security classification. But with someone who is in such close proximity to the president, it is highly likely, especially at all hours of the day, it's highly likely that there were times where she would be around highly sensitive information. Now, the reasons for why Harp kicked the can down the road on obtaining this security clearance are unknown, but it is something that alarmed White House staffers, some of the people that we spoke with, along with national security advisors and the FBI, the people who are in charge of providing these clearances to staffers. It's something that's almost assumed that if you are working in such close proximity to the president, traveling with him on Air Force One, as seen in those photos we're watching right now, that those sorts of staff have those kinds of clearances. Yes, it is a very lengthy process. There are people in the administration who work in the White House in senior positions who have obtained extensions. We found that Harp did obtain several extensions along the way. That is a normal part of the process. But going for this long a period of time, declining to fill it out is not normal at all.
Not normal at all. You said it was mind-boggling, Ned.
Well, it's mind-boggling for a simple reason. Look, we've heard a lot about the administrative aspects of the job, what it means to be the quote-unquote human printer for President Trump, what those titles of special assistant or executive assistant to the president mean. But I think we have to consider the national security implications of this. And to my mind, the biggest implication is that you have someone who essentially has at least the ability to see everything that crosses the president's desk, whether it's from within the White House, from places like the National Economic Council, the Council on Economic Advisors, the Domestic Policy Council. And here's where you get into challenges, like the National Security Council, or from other departments and agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency or other parts of our intelligence community. Let me put this in perspective. When I worked in the White House, I went over there from the CIA. Rather than just assume that as a CIA officer I had a security clearance, the White House double-checked that to make sure I actually had one, that I was in good standing, and that I could see everything that I was supposed to see. In my last job in government, I received the PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing, every single day. And yet I still did not have all of the code word clearances the President of the United States did. Someone in Natalie Harp's role who could potentially be within earshot of all of those conversations and see every single document that's going to the president's desk, you better hope that she at the very least has a clearance. One final point on this, because we could spend hours talking about this, but there's the hypocrisy of all of this.
I've got 2 hours to take your time.
There is the hypocrisy of all of this. After all, this was the president who in 2016 essentially ran on information security. Remember butthurt emails? There was a whole issue with a former Secretary of State and her information security practices. The fact was that this was the president who championed those, who championed doing things differently, and this is what we see now.
Let me just ask you real quickly before I move on to what this tells us about the White House itself. Is opting out an option?
That was news to me. I didn't know that as a White House employee, you had the ability to say thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to go through this process. It's a rigorous process. The SF-86, the form you have to fill out, asks you for a litany of things, yes, going back 10 years in most cases, where you've traveled, if you have foreign national friends and acquaintances, if you've ever done anything that you're embarrassed of in your life. Of course, who would want to fill that out? But you know what? It typically is a condition of employment, part of the privilege privilege of working there.
Mitch Landrieu, the other thing about this story that I think is notable is that there were folks inside the White House who were willing to talk to MS Now reporters and say that there were alarm bells going off about this from inside the White House. What does it tell you about the way they're running their operation, that this was allowed to happen?
Well, it tells you how reckless the president is and how inattentive he is to the things that protect our nation's security. The first thing they do when you get to the White House is tell you to be careful because foreign governments are always trying to infiltrate. They tell you that when you walk out of that White House gate and you're walking home, you should actually be careful because of other governments trying to talk to or manipulate. They're very careful. There is nothing usual about this particular situation. You can't say, I'll take an extension. You want to know everybody working in the White House and what all their contacts are. Everybody goes through extensive background checks, and then the security clearance that you get depends on your proximity to the president. And when somebody is that proximate to the president, as much as evidently she is, it would be highly unusual. I'll be challenged by this by national security experts, but in my experience in the year and a half of the White House, you didn't get anywhere near anything if you didn't have a pretty high security clearance. So this is not usual. It's not something that you can brush aside. It's not something that the president just gets to say, oh, no, it doesn't matter who's sitting next to me, especially a person that's got his ear and has access to him all the time. There's nothing usual about that.
Jackie, one of the people you quoted said that Harp, quote, plays into the less productive and more troublesome parts of Trump's nature, putting things in front of him that aren't vetted. Talk to me about what the specific concerns are inside the White House.
Yeah, and Alicia, this is sort of separate from the national security concerns, although at the end of the day, they all kind of bleed into one another because the information that the president is getting that can be unvetted and the information flow that's going in via Harp can lead to potentially problematic national security decisions that this president is making, potentially based on disinformation or whatever she is printing out and putting on his desk. And I mean, in all presidencies, the staff secretary, the people who are sitting outside of the Oval Office have great power in part because of what they can ultimately get on the president's desk. And Harp has been known, as you just read, to be someone who tends to bring out his worst instincts, his propensity for engaging in Twitter feuds, retweeting AI, retweeting really inflammatory things. Some of the reporting that was left on the cutting room floor, or potentially saved for a future piece, is that, Harp has also been known to flag things on the president's Truth Social and Twitter feed that he has gone on to retweet that have exploded into big problems for him. From a political standpoint. And so that is where I think a lot of this frustration is coming from with regards to Harp's proximity, is that the filter it has become a headache for many who have to then clean up the problems that the information flow causes.
Okay, I think, Ned, that is part of why this is breaking through. You had Senator Ossoff using this episode to point out that Natalie Harp is part of a group of people that help shield the president from Americans' actual concerns so he can hold events like the one we saw yesterday. Take a look.
I'm fixing the country. We're fixing the White House, too. We've done the colonnade, going to the Oval Office. We put the black granite down. We put topsoil, brand new earth on top. Very. Lot of good ingredients in that earth for grass. If you're grass, you're very happy. This is a helipad at the highest level. You look at the lettering and you look at the joints. They're like flawless. Oh, that's great, yeah. Well, this is going to look incredible from the air and from every place.
Listen, the economy is booming. You don't have a war of choice raging in Iran. Go ahead and have as many side quests as you want. But it's a reminder that he's not actually focused on what Americans care about. That's why I think the Ossoff point is breaking through.
Well, and that's also why the White House went ballistic on Senator Ossoff. But if you watch what the president did yesterday, the White House essentially made his own point. They made Senator Ossoff's point. After all, to be fair to Senator Ossoff, this was never about Natalie Harp. President Trump was the subject of that sentence. The invocation of a first name, it could have been any name. Anyone who traveled with the president, served as a human printer, served as a human pacifier, the person who just flooded the president with positive press coverage and, kept him in a good mood and kept everything on even keel. The fact that we have a president that needs someone like that to travel with him as he otherwise engages in his vanity projects, as he otherwise remakes the West Wing, remakes the broader White House, remakes broader Washington, D.C., and focuses not on the concerns of Americans, but on what really motivates him. And those things, as Senator Ossoff was pointing out, are not one and the same. The White House has gone after Senator Ossoff quite aggressively. That is a very legitimate line of criticism when the president is not focused on what every single American is focused on.
All right. Ned, I'm going to ask you to stay with me. You too, Mitch. Jackie El Ameni, thank you so much for bringing us your reporting.